Now, in today's episode, what I want to do is talk to you about self-esteem. Now, I've spoken a lot about how self-esteem is the biggest determinant of whether or not your relationships will last. The breakdown and maintenance of relationship is almost entirely contingent on your self-esteem. Those with high self-esteem find relationships quite effortlessly. They also maintain relationships quite easily. But if there's one factor that will break up relationships is low self-esteem, because it affects your selection process, it affects your ability to communicate, it affects your ability to resolve conflict, it affects everything. So we really, really need to build our self-esteem. Now, having low self-esteem is very, very normal. And one thing that people get confused is they confuse confidence and self-esteem. Confidence is your ability to complete a particular task. So let's say, for example, I'm really confident at cooking, or let's say I'm really confident at my work, or let's say I'm really confident at public speaking. That's my self-confidence. I might be filled with it. But self-esteem is, you can tell what somebody's self-esteem is like by what they accept in their life, particularly in romantic relationships. Now, self-esteem really is just what you expect from people, what you accept and expect from people. Now, somebody who accepts a lot of abuse probably has low self-esteem. Somebody who expects, a lot of neglect probably has low self-esteem. Somebody who doesn't accept that and sets some very careful boundaries, but also gives a lot. Self-esteem is not just what you accept from people, it's also what you do to people. People who do lots of nice things to people but don't accept horrible things being done, that's probably a healthy level of self-esteem. Because there's other people out there that will expect someone to pay all their bills and to take all their money and like sleep with them, whatever it is, but they don't give much back. That's still a signal of low self-esteem, because self-esteem not only involves what you accept from others, but also what you give back to others. And only those with high self-esteem are in a position to give back, because they have a healthy sense of reality, and they realize connections are a dynamic and it involves two people giving and receiving. So that's the difference between confidence and self-esteem. Now, those with low self-esteem, where it comes from is very much your childhood. And I know I talk about this a lot, but if you grow up with parents that are inconsistent or unloving or a bit cold or a bit rejecting, or if you grew up in an environment where they favored siblings, or if you grew up in an environment where you were bullied by your peers and you didn't do well academically, those early years are really formative. And the reason they're so formative is they create a core belief, a belief about yourself. Now, your core belief might be that nobody loves me, or I'm not attractive, or I am stupid, I'm not very smart. Or your core belief might be that I'm not going to, nobody is going to stay with me, everybody's going to leave me. For whatever reasons, we might develop a negative core belief in our childhood, which leads to low self-esteem. Now, that doesn't mean your low self-esteem has to be fixed. It's never too late for a good childhood, and you can undo that damage in a couple of steps. And I'm going to teach you how to undo the damage of low self-esteem and how to improve your self-esteem. The first thing that you have to do to improve your self-esteem is have a look at your value system. Now, there's been research by Johann Hari, who kind of distinguished between intrinsic and extrinsic values. And intrinsic values is how much you value things like connections with others, or respect for people, or giving back, like these intangible things that you can't see, but they mean a lot to you. How much you value being truthful, how much you value being sincere and authentic. These are your values. Now, other people have what's known as extrinsic values. Now, extrinsic values is your happiness is determined by how many stuff you have, like materialism, like money, or it's your happiness is determined by your attractiveness, like how attractive you are or how attractive your partner is, or your value is determined by your extrinsic values can also include being famous or being popular. It depends on other people seeing it for it to mean something to you. Your happiness depends on how much other people approve of what it is that you have. So those are extrinsic values, whereas intrinsic values are very much internal, and they exist with or without people. So when people lean towards extrinsic values, so they focus on things like looks, money, fame, popularity, external things, they're more likely to have low self-esteem. And the reason being is because those things are so fragile. They can disappear at any time. We know our looks are going to fade. We know that money can disappear at any point. We know fame is futile. It's going to disappear at some point as well. Whereas having a stance towards truth, or having good, healthy connections, or giving back to those that are less fortunate, these values exist with or without an audience, and they'll exist permanently. So you have a look at what you value in life, and how you know what you value in life is usually by what you put most of your energy into, but also what you get jealous about. If I'm super jealous of somebody because they've got a Rolex or because they've got a Lamborghini, that suggests my values are more extrinsic. But if I'm jealous of somebody because they are really brave, or they're really authentic, or they're really intelligent, that means I have more intrinsic values. So have a look at your value system. And if they're very external and very extrinsic, try and shift them more to intrinsic, because having extrinsic values, not only is it bad for you, but for your self-esteem, but it's also bad for your connections. You end up having competition with others, because your happiness depends on other people seeing you and other people praising you. You're almost in a constant competition with other people. So first step towards better self-esteem is assessing your values. Now, the second step towards self-esteem is having really strong self-control. Now, there's been so many studies like the marshmallow test, where they looked at children and they gave them a marshmallow and they said, if you wait, you'll get 2 marshmallows. But if you have this straight away, you won't get another one. And they found that the ones that waited and had self-control were more likely to be academically successful. They were more successful with their peers. They just had a better quality of life as they got older. And the reason why self-control is so important is because what it does is it makes you forego temporary satisfaction for long-term satisfaction. What I mean by this is, if I have self-control and I don't eat that piece of chocolate cake, what will happen is, in the moment I won't feel good, but later on I'll have a better body. Or if I don't spend all my money on the gambling machine, in the moment I miss out on dopamine, but in the long term I have financial security. Now, what self-control does is it builds your self-esteem, because what happens is you start respecting yourself more when you can exercise self-control. When you can forego temporary desires for your long-term goals, you start to respect yourself so much more. And this applies even for people. When you have self-control and you don't kind of go back to the ex that was rude to you and disrespectful, or you don't give in to every woman that wants to have sex with you. When you have self-control, you will start to respect yourself so much more. And how you build self-control is, every time you go to make a decision, you ask yourself, is there any chance that I'm going to feel any shame, any guilt, or any regret? If there's any shame, guilt, or regret made from this particular decision, don't do it. If there's even an inch of it, you're going to regret it. But if the decision involves no shame, no guilt, no regret, then do that. Always do the thing that has no regrets. The more you live a life that has no shame, no guilt, no regret, the more you'll start to respect yourself, and the more you'll like yourself. And therefore your self-esteem will naturally improve. So whereas when you look at people who have low self-esteem, just look at all their decisions. They're chaotic. They are poor decisions. They're short-term goal orientated. So they're doing things that they hate. They'll overdrink and then the next day have a hangover. They'll overspend and the next month they're living paycheck to paycheck. They'll go sleep around and then the next day they feel a bit like, oh God, I'm stuck with this woman. So they live a life filled with regret. And then they start to dislike themselves, and then their self-esteem drops. So you want to start practicing more self-control if you want to improve your self-esteem. The third step towards building your self-esteem is fulfilling your potential. Now, how you fulfill your potential is you have a look at the person that you are today. Think about your weight, think about your finances, think about your job, think about your connections, and that is your current self-concept. Compare that to your ideal self. What would an ideal life look like for you? What would be the body you would have? What would be the money you would have? What would be the relationships you have? Now, if there's a huge gap between that, where you are now and where you want to be, chances are you're not fulfilling your potential. But as the gap closes, the closer you are to your full potential. Now, as that gap is, if it's very wide, you're going to have low self-esteem. If your body's nowhere near where you want it to be, if your money's nowhere you want it to be, if your relationships are nowhere near where you want it to be, you're going to have low self-esteem. So what you want to do is make sure that you are fulfilling your potential in every way, shape, or form. And how you can fulfill your potential is have a look at all the problems that you're going through in your life. Yeah, all the different problems. There might be problems with your friends, it might be problems with your family, it might be problems with your weight, it might be problems with your money, and get into problem-solving mode. How do I fix these problems? All the problems you can fix, you try and fix. All the ones you can't, you let go of. Now, as you start fixing all your problems and you fix them without making any shameful or regretful decisions, you keep fixing your problems, the gap between your current self and your ideal self will start to close and you'll start to fulfill your potential. But if you just have a bunch of problems and you don't acknowledge them and you just go into denial and you don't try and fix them, then what will happen is the gap will widen and your self-esteem will drop. So you really have to make sure you make an active effort to fulfill your potential as much as possible. The final step towards high self-esteem is giving back. Now, the thing with giving back and giving to others and providing a service to others is innately it makes you feel more valuable, because you believe you're fulfilling your purpose by giving to others. Here's where people get it wrong. Some men, particularly men, do this, and even women, actually, women do this as well. They'll meet a partner who is an absolute mess, and they want to feel their self-esteem grow through helping them, through fixing them. So they'll give back to this person, give and give and give, thinking that this person is then going to fall in love with them because, you know, they're the Superman or they're the Superwoman who's just come into their life and fixed every problem. The problem with that is we cannot give with the underlying intention of making that person attached to us. That won't help our self-esteem. The reason why that won't help our self-esteem is people who give too much and give hoping that you'll attach them end up with people who take a lot. Takers. And with takers, they actually lose love and attachment to the person that they're taking from.